I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I am Sunil Dasgupta. As someone who cares about the environment, I have joined numerous invasive plant removal drives in Rock Creek Park, along the tributaries of the Anacostia River, around my kids' schools. But as a first generation immigrant, I'm deeply conflicted about the idea that non native species do not belong here, and worse, are harmful to local plant and animal life. The anti immigrant posture of the Trump administration, the deportations, have only heightened my anxiety about belonging. But it took the gleeful stomping of the invasive Asian insect, the spotted lanternfly, by my own family for me to ask the question, is this necessary? Is this useful to kill a spotted lanternfly? After some searching of the literature, I found evolutionary biologist and plant hopper expert Julie Urban at Penn State, where she works on understanding the behavior of the spotted lanternfly, and she participates in teams working to mitigate their impact, particularly on mid Atlantic agriculture. Stay with us to do some real science.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
The beat was breaking down just before we met. Sweating in the dark, burning from the sparks that glow.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning, precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Drew Pictures and the Lead Extras, an indie pop rock band based in Rockville, Maryland. Andrew Glore on vocals and keys, Brian Wolf on guitar, and Josh Wilson on drums. The songs come from their album Cats on Santorini. You can find their music at drewpicturesmusic.com.
Tangled up in red, tango in the dread limbo. When you spin me in the web, I'll have no regret. Who's the real prey? You just let me sway below. Whip me up like butter, I'm a fire brand. Hold me to the fire and leave me dead. Wishy, wishy woman, who you gonna summon? And how do you know for sure? I don't wanna be alone.
Julie Urban, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you for having me. I'm supposed to say I hate being here, but I find Sunil too charming. This is great.
Well, thank you for being here. I asked you on the show because we have a raging debate in my home over whether to kill lanternflies on site. Can you please help us?
Yes, I can. Where you are in DC and in other major cities and kind of the whole eastern area, we've been promoting like a Stomp It campaign. And so the idea of asking the public to engage us in killing lanternfly where we can. And so I think that there's a lot of misinterpretation of that. That's not meant to be the control effort. There are, the federal government, USDA APHIS, and states Department of Agriculture are applying insecticide treatments. They're treating Tree of Heaven, one of lanternfly's preferred hosts, with herbicides to try to knock those back. And so with limited resources, though, they're focused on main transportation hubs, airports, where rail lines connect and shipping lines, truck areas. And so it's not like, well, public, hope you have a good tread on those shoes, have at it. It's more along the lines of, if you don't kill it, you'll carry it. And so the idea that lanternfly is such a good hitchhiker with humans, that this is, bringing about awareness so you're looking for them, but then also making sure that, you do kill them before you get in your car and go out to the beautiful vineyards in Virginia or upstate New York, or, basically some areas where we don't have lanternfly yet, and we're trying like crazy to keep it out of there because it could have a much more severe impact than really anything we've seen to date. So it's like the public is helping us buy time for the science to come up with better controls for vineyards and juice grape production along Lake Erie.
Explain where lanternflies come from. Why are they here?
Lanternflies are from Southeast Asia. They belong to a family of, they're plant hoppers called Fulgoridae. That's the common name of the lanternflies. And that's an area, that's what I did my PhD dissertation on. And so mostly they're tropically distributed, group of 500 species. This one is somewhat of an odd duck. It occupies more temperate regions than most other lanternflies do, but common to other species that I've studied in the tropics, it will lay its eggs on anything. And so this is kind of weird, because usually if you think about a plant feeding insect, when an insect lays its eggs and the eggs hatch out, they don't have wings. They have to go through a series of molts, through stages and grow up before they get their wings. And so typically you would put your eggs on a host plant where your offspring can feed. Apparently, lanternflies didn't read the literature, but basically they have a very broad host range. Yes, they like tree of heaven, Ailanthus altissima. It's from its native range, but there's records that they feed on over 100 different species of plants and trees that are found in North America. And so when it lays its eggs on anything, we mean anything. And so it doesn't have to be a plant or a tree. It can be a rock. We think because of where it showed up and was first reported, close to a stone yard that had landscaping materials shipped in from all over the world. The egg masses were laid. They look like they're highly camouflaged. They look like a splash of mud. So likely the egg masses were laid on a pallet of rocks, the pallet or the rocks themselves, and that allows them to get transported very, very easily without detection. This happened in South Korea in like the early 2000s. And so USDA APHIS folks were on the lookout for it. But even still, the egg masses got in and were detected, we think, about 2 years later.
How long has the spotted lanternfly been in the U.S.?
In the U.S., it was first detected and reported in September in 2014, but subsequent surveys found older egg masses, suggesting it was here about 1 to 2 years prior to that, so 2012.
And what is the scope of the problem right now?
In some ways, it's not as bad as we expected when it first arrived. So when it first arrived, we had what was reported in South Korea. And that was that, it's a sap feeder, so it feeds on phloem. So it's like depleting a plant of its nutrient resources. And so the greatest damage was reported to grapevines, but it was also reported to be damaging to apple, peaches, other tree fruit, ornamental trees, timber trees. And so when it showed up in Pennsylvania, it's like, oh man, those are all really important for us. But if you look at dollar amounts, timber is the largest industry in our state of those. But what we've learned from studies that are conducted by colleagues of mine at Penn State, but also USDA, other collaborators, basically where they constrained lanternfly to these tree fruit and took different measures of plant health and growth and whatnot. And they found that yes, lanternfly feeding is a stressor on ornamental trees and on tree fruit, but it doesn't kill them. The trees will recover. It's not as bad as we thought, but it can kill grapevine. The things that it's feeding can outright kill are grapevine, tree of heaven, after multiple years of feeding. And like nobody cares about that. That's an introduced invasive, but you don't want standing dead large trees on your landscape. And the occasional black walnut sapling. So it's not as expansive in terms of the industries that it hits, but it is really damaging to grapevines. Where lanternfly has been the longest, right, in eastern Pennsylvania, kind of in northern Virginia, Maryland, and New Jersey, we've seen that 2 years of feeding damage from experiments is enough to reduce grape yield, berry weight, really mess up the carbohydrate storage in the roots, do a number on it. But what's interesting is that those areas tend to be smaller vineyards and they produce wines. And so where it is edging right now, especially again with where we are in Pennsylvania and working with New York, you have the Erie Grape Belt along Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York, which is together 32,000 acres of mostly Concord grapes that are juice grapes. And so those growers have a much slimmer profit margin than wine grapes do. They're selling to cooperatives. It like gets really hairy and much more complex really, really fast. And so it's not there yet, but it's darn close. And then where you are in DC, it's moving, south, and it's starting to hit the higher value vineyards. I think like the Monticello AVA has some, so it's and same thing at Hudson River Valley and to Long Island. It's moving into kind of higher value vineyards and these juice grape areas where it could have a much greater economic impact.
The regular fruit trees that you talked about, and you said they don't damage them much. So the crop yields for peaches and apples and those things don't fall as a consequence of lanternfly, but for grapes they do.
Yes, correct. And so there's a researcher, a colleague of mine on some grants, Tracy Lesky. She's a USDA ARS researcher. She's the head of the Appalachian Fruit Research Station. And her postdoc, Laura Nixon, and her, they did this great study where basically they took young peach trees and apple trees. They constrained lanternfly and like kind of force fed the lanternfly on those trees. And then they planted those trees at the end of that season into the ground and then measured subsequent growth, and recovery the next year. Because you would think if it's going to nail something, it's going to hit, young saplings. And they saw no ill effect, really. So, and if you've seen, I think we have videos coming from my lab that made their rounds back in the day of lanternfly just covering apple trees back from 2017. We found that, yes, they'll feed on apple trees and peach trees, but they moved off. They were there for a few weeks, moved on. They didn't stay and feed very heavily for weeks at a time on those trees.
So is the science recommending remediation for the fruit trees? I'm sure it's recommending remediation for grapevines, but for the fruit trees, no remediation, just wait it out.
Basically it's up to the growers, but typically growers have not, like folks we've interacted with, they've found that it's not enough to warrant another spray. And so some of the things that like one tree fruit grower that we work with in Pennsylvania, they have some ailanthus or tree of heaven in their vineyard. And so they kind of use that as a trap tree and kill them there before they come onto the tree fruit. And they've been able to manage fine. But the thing is, lanternfly feeding preferences are relative to what's in an area. So if you're talking, okay, now we have lanternflies in Georgia, right? And South Carolina, North Carolina. And so somewhere where you have like a longer feeding season, and if you have stressed peach trees from drought or something, it's not that they're completely safe. It could be a different situation in that case. When lanternflies impacts can change, and I fear they might change as they spread to different regions of the country.
What is the remediation for grapevines? And because they might need to spray, do you think we ought to be washing grapes more carefully?
No, I don't think that's an issue. I've learned a lot about insecticides and how important they are in our farming systems in many cases. And so there's safety built into that. And this is kind of why lanternfly is such a big problem to grape growers, because different active ingredients and insecticides have what's called a pre-harvest interval. And it's basically the minimum amount of time that has to pass between when the grapevines are sprayed to when it's safe to harvest the fruit.
Okay.
So it's kind of this built-in window. Lanternfly is no different than anything else in that sense. You always they might apply for earlier in the season for Japanese beetle, that kind of thing. But what's a problem is that lanternflies are weird for a lot of ways, but they're adults about now, but they don't start mating and laying eggs until September. So at that time, that's when we see them engage in these like bouts of a lot of flight, or when you're really going to see them in downtown, that kind of thing. That's when they need to feed very, very heavily to become reproductively mature. And so some of my work and I'm sitting on still acquiring more data, tracks that increase in mass, particularly of the females, and looking at their reproductive development internally and how that varies by latitude. It's that heavy, heavy feeding time when they come into grapes at harvest. And so even though a lot of insecticides will easily kill lanternfly, that's not really a problem, but they're coming in these waves. And so you can only apply a product that has a short pre-harvest interval because they're getting ready to, to harvest their grapes. That'll knock down the lanternfly, but it doesn't stop more from coming in. And so with these waves, even though the growers apply the spray, they can't keep up and totally protect the grapevines from damage. It's those short acting chemicals that are safe that you don't have to worry about eating your grapes, but it's this constant wave of this constant influx of lanternfly at that time of the year that's so damaging for them.
Is that the only solution? Are they doing anything else?
We're trying a lot of different things. We still have research underway. Trapping is an important thing. Monitoring, basically, they don't want to spray if they don't have to. That costs money and time, but it really depends on your situation. And so what's challenging for lanternfly is that, like, you think about a border spray. Let's, get permission to spray the wood line, so that keeps them from coming in. But in work that we've done to date, they're coming from farther away. And so you kind of have to look at an area-wide scale to try to better understand where they're coming from and how we can use some of these methods like trapping, biological control of tree of heaven, other things to try to change that movement and reduce that influx. So the colleague that I mentioned, Tracy Lesky, she has a large area-wide grant. It's a USDA grant where I'm a part of it and a lot of folks are at Virginia Tech, where we're in year one of it, but we're doing a 5-year monitoring study of vineyards in Pennsylvania and Virginia and looking at exactly this movement. We're doing counts on edges of these vineyards every 2 weeks. We're doing transects throughout. We're recording the presence of Tree of Heaven and where it is. There's a postdoc that has a drone that's, flying and mapping Tree of Heaven over the landscape. And so what we're doing in that is looking at how some different biological control agents. There's a fungus, an entomopathogenic fungus called Bavaria that's been formulated as an insecticide. It's like a safe insecticide. The spores hit the lanternfly and get in there and eat it from the inside out. We've done some studies with that. That's more challenging than you would think, but we're looking at that Bavaria control, entomopathogenic nematodes that, can attack, and also a verticillium wilt, like a pathogen of Tree of Heaven itself that's under experimentation and has some potential for release. So we're on it. We're on it. It just takes time to get these solutions. And yeah, the entomopathogenic nematodes are kind of cool.
You have to explain that in plain language.
So entomo is insect and pathogenic, it's like pathogen. So whenever you call it entomopathogenic something, it's just like the formal word for it attacks insects.
Okay.
And so it's a beneficial nematode that attacks insects. I have Japanese beetles crazy bad in my yard this year, right? And so I've been reading there's a beneficial, I'm not going to apply insecticides on my yard. I'm an entomologist, and so, but there's nematodes that specifically attack Japanese beetle grubs and are very specific to them when they're, underground. Mm-hmm. And so nematodes sometimes they're pathogenic, but there's some that are these beneficial predators that are very specific to only targeting certain pests and not others. And so that's what Tracy Lesky's group and Laura Nixon, they're testing which of those can kill lanternfly.
Okay, now I must ask, where do you get these nematodes? Do you buy them?
That's one of the partners in this grant. There's a company that they formulate them. A lot of these things are naturally occurring. And so I can kind of speak to Bavaria a little bit. So I had led this large $7 million multi-institutional grant on lanternfly starting back in 2019. And some folks in the group, she's now retired, Ann Hayek at Cornell, that's her thing. Those fungi that attack insects is really important. This one product, Bavaria bassiana, has been studied for years and made into an actual formulation where you can go and buy it, But where those things come from is that they're naturally discovered. And so that was some of the work that Anne and her postdoc were doing. We're looking for lanternfly carcasses that were, fuzzy and infected with fungus so that they could plate that out and identify and say, oh, hey, could this be a new, natural enemy against lanternfly? Because if it's already in our environment and it's not killing off other insects massively, I mean, the logic is that it's co-evolved with the arthropods in our ecosystem. And so basically they're like immune to it, or their defense, they're not prey to it. But a foreign invasive would be not immune to it. It wouldn't have co-evolved with it. And so that's kind of where some of these natural enemies come from, by looking at what's already out there working in the environment.
I read that there was a wasp predator which was also invasive.
My money is on that. People who specialize in this, USDA aphis scientists and ARS scientists, within 2 weeks of lanternfly being detected, USDA aphis put together a technical working group of scientists to get to work to help advise. And so I was brought in at that time. Some of these folks who are these biological control experts were brought in at that time. They went to China and they found 2 parasitoid wasps that they brought back into high containment facilities back here. They've been working on these things since 2015. And so in order to be able to use one of these natural enemies, first you have to rear it. So you have to either feed it lanternfly eggs. They brought over an egg parasitoid and a nymphal parasitoid. And that was a whole big thing because that took years to try to figure out the timing of the life cycle of the wasp relative to the lanternfly, their subspecies, all this stuff. Then you get to a period of testing. If it seems to be effective, you need to make sure that it's not going to kill native insects. And so they do non-target testing. With the egg parasitoid, what they found was that under artificial lab conditions that favored the possibility that it could use another egg, so under these strict requirements, it did lay its eggs in other species, so they pulled back on that. They said it was too much of a generalist. But they're moving forward with this other that's really specific. It's a wasp that'll grapple like second, third instar lanternfly and lay its eggs in the nymphs. That's really promising. And like, as someone who collected plant hoppers from around the world, this type of parasitoid wasp, again, there's a lot of species of it, when they grow, you can see them in the plant hopper before it kills it as like an outpocketing on its side. I've seen that a lot. I've seen that a ton in different plant hoppers from around the world. This group of wasps is a very common natural enemy specific to plant hoppers. And so I think they even occur in the fossil record too with plant hoppers. And so I think that this is really strong case for something that could be effective.
Would you not want something that is native here rather than something that is bought from China? I mean, that's the concern that I have, is that we are trying to, enemy of an enemy, but the consequences may be unintended.
There's a lot built in to make sure the system is safe when that's done, when they do release natural enemies that are foreign to this area. But certainly a lot of folks have been doing research to look for natural enemies that are already here. And they found a few of them right off in the early days.
But if you see plant hoppers in so many places, and you've seen them all, it seems that there are native plant hoppers with outsacks that also can do the same thing, but they don't, right?
Except if you think about, again, I'm not a specialist in these parasitoid wasps, but in order to, there's a lot of advanced chemistry that has to go on to be able to lay your egg in another live insect, have it remain undetected by that insect's immune system, allow it to grow and outpocket out. They tend to co-evolve kind of very tightly with their given prey species. And so it's not like a praying mantid that'll like chow on everything, right? There's a lot of specialization with the venoms and that type of thing. It's a highly nuanced system when it works. That would be good if you're getting one of the enemies that's co-evolved to be really good against, this particular lanternfly, this particular plant hopper. Then it's unlikely that it's going to parasitize other things that are native here.
There isn't any way to contain them, though, really, right? Once you release them.
If it's co-evolved and it's good with lanternfly and you've tested it against these other things that are out there, it's not going to have a food source. And so those populations are going to collapse. And so the idea is that you would need to do like a massive rearing and a release of those to knock it down.
And then self-collapsing population.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Again, this isn't my area, but it's like a kind of
It's fascinating.
It really is. Yeah. Well, but also there was a parasitoid wasp that I think was introduced here for spongy moth back in the day, like a number of decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
And they found it does parasitize lanternfly egg masses, but at a very low rate in terms of number of egg masses in an area and the number of eggs in that mass. Everybody's on the lookout. The idea is that, okay, perhaps, especially as lanternfly moves more south, you get increased diversity as you get into warmer areas. And so it could be the case that there could be another parasitoid or a different natural enemy, like of a stink bug. There's one that has been, it's not been reported in the literature, but people are tracking these things just with that hope that there might be something here. That's another whole line of research.
Oh boy, stink bugs v. lanternfly. This is going to be exciting.
Yeah, right? Because I think, especially in the eastern U.S., there's not a lot of native plant hopper diversity. There's a lot of native stink bug diversity, and there's various wasps that will parasitize stink bugs. Since they're also in the same order as lanternfly, that's kind of a key suspect to look for. If there's somebody here that'll help us out, we'll take it.
I want to continue this murder conversation a little bit more. Go back to this Stomp It program that USDA and others have sought to promote, particularly in the Washington, D.C. region. You are saying that that is only valid for people traveling outside the region or traveling anywhere? Or is it the case that the rest of my family is right and that they should stomp it out whenever they see it?
They should stomp it out whenever they see it. Overall, you are kind of trying to help reduce the population because you just don't know. Like, they're very patchily distributed. And so you might have a ton on one block and none on the next. By killing them, you're just not moving them because it's not just the egg masses. It's, they get in your car, they can really, really travel with you. It pains me because I study these because I'm in awe of them. It's kind of the responsible thing to do to knock them down where you can. That's not what we're relying upon for population control. Everybody goes somewhere, even if it's just back to the suburbs from the city at home. This is a challenge, right? We've seen lanternfly spread despite having these campaigns for a while. I fear when we see the adults move and fly in September, you might see them in numbers. We're not in a drought year. The insects are sap feeders. And water is really important for trees. We've seen a dropping off of numbers in previous years where populations had previously been high, but we're seeing a resurgence back in those areas, like in Berks County. And so I wouldn't be surprised if in the Washington area and in Virginia, you might see a resurgence this fall. And all I can say is that when you're talking about a grower who might go out of business in Erie, Pennsylvania, or in some beautiful vineyards in Virginia, they only go through one life cycle a year. If you can just help by not moving it, that might be enough time for more work to be done on these other longer term solutions.
There you have it. The murder of lanternflies. Julie Urban, thank you.
Sure. Thank you. This is fun.
Keep me running. Everything's perfect when it's new.
That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analysis. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Drew Pictures and the Lead Extras, an indie pop rock band based in Rockville, Maryland. Andrew Glore on vocals and keys, Brian Wolf on guitar, and Josh Wilson on drums. The songs come from their album Cats on Santorini. You can find their music at drewpicturesmusic.com. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
On the